field from home.
Benjamin Burrell, George's friend, then saw someone who could well have been Whittle at about 11:30. In his unsettling testimony, Benjamin told how he came across a young man on the moor near to where the body was subsequently found.
This man had a gun with him and asked me whether I'd seen two men coming off the moor. I said I had not and continued on my way. The man followed behind. After a few minutes, for some reason or other, I turned around and there was the man taking aim. He slowly put the gun to his side and asked me if I'd seen some birds. I said I'd not seen any birds and asked him if he could shoot birds flying. He said he could, and if I went with him on the moor, he would shoot me one and show me a good path to Belmont. The stranger came very close to me, but as I did not see the path after a few yards, I returned to the main path saying I had business to attend to, and I went on my way.
Henderson's fellow Scotsman Benjamin Burrell was unable to provide an accurate description of the physical features of the man he met on the moors, because he was wearing a hat over his eyes. He thought that his clothing and voice appeared very similar to that of Whittle, but he was unable to state with any certainty that the man was in fact Whittle.
I am Anne Garbutt. I am wife of William Garbutt and live at 5 houses near to the prisoner. I saw the prisoner passing the window of our beer house at about 12, while the Scotchman was still inside finishing his beer. The prisoner was going in the direction of Belmont, that is towards the stumps and the tunnel. As soon as the prisoner had passed, the Scotchman bid his farewell and left going towards Belmont. Myself and my husband then had dinner, and after about 20 minutes I saw the prisoner again, this time coming from the direction of his own house.
The next time Whittle is seen by a Joseph Halliwell. This testimony probably should have sent Whittle to the gallows, but Halliwell proved to be so unreliable that his testimony helped the defence more than the prosecution. That morning Halliwell left Gilligant's farm, where he spoke to a Mrs. Hood, who gave him directions to Belmont. He was on horseback. Unfortunately, he then proceeds to get lost, stumble across the accused Whittle with a gun, and also George lying in the ditch.
Halliwell's testimony, if it were to be believed, should have secured Whittle's conviction. Instead, Charles Wilkins, who was Whittle's counsel, virtually demolished Halliwell's evidence and exposed it for what it was. It was a mixture of fabrication, half-truths, contradictions and, in some parts, sheer fantasy. Through skillful cross-examination, Wilkins succeeded in undermining Halliwell's credibility as a witness, and in so doing, he sowed the seeds of doubt in the minds of the jury.
Defence counsel then goes on to make the witness look totally unreliable. A short extract will serve as an example.
Did you ever buy any cattle from anyone else on your own account?
Yes, I have. I've bought many cows since Christmas from a man named John Wilson, a cattle dealer from Cole at Lancaster.
How many times since Christmas?
I can't say.
About how many?
I've no idea.
How much have you paid him for cattle since then?
I can't tell you.
About how much?
I can't say.
About?
I don't know.
I ask you, sir, about how much?
Nay, there's no doubt about it. I can't tell you how much I paid.
What has been the largest sum at any time you have paid him?
I don't know nothing about sums.
Let us recap. George's body was discovered by a young lad, Thomas Hoole. George was alive when Thomas found him, and the lad rushed to a nearby pit for help. At the pit were Mary Entwistle and her father James Fletcher. They testified to hearing a gunshot a few minutes before Thomas arrived. All three hurried to the murder scene. George was lying on his back in the ditch with horrific gunshot injuries to his face. Mary rushed to another nearby pit where Thomas Ratcliffe was working. He also went to the scene, and with James Fletcher lifted George out of the ditch. Mary ran to Five Houses for more help. As she ran down the road towards Five Houses, she shouted, "Run, Mr. Garbutt, they have shot the Scotchman." Thomas Hoole also ran for help and saw Garbutt and John Whittle, the father of the accused, coming up the road. Garbutt sent John Whittle for a doctor and a constable. This is the only time Whittle's father is mentioned in court. When Mary arrived at Garbutt's to raise the alarm, the accused was also there, but either did not hear Mary or decided to ignore her as all the other people went to George's aid. The accused went in the opposite direction. The other people who were there all said that Whittle should have heard Mary. This is the last Whittle is seen at Five Houses. He is next seen at the Moorgate Inn, where the inquest took place at about 1 to 1:30.
The Moorgate Inn at Horwich, now the Blundell Arms, was approximately 2 miles distance from Five Houses. There was no direct track between the two locations, but easy access was gained over the moors.
Mr. Lambert, who kept the Moorgate, testified that Whittle appeared there at about 1:30. Whittle had borrowed the gun he had with him that day off Lambert the very day before. He brought it with him then and placed it in the brew house. This gun was subsequently given to a gun expert and then to the local constable.
The gun used by Whittle on the Friday was still loaded with shot when it was collected and taken away by the local police for examination. When the shot was weighed, it was found to be a mixture of number 1 and number 2 shot. Now, the remnants of lead shot removed from Henderson's brain at the post-mortem was found to be 6 pieces of number 3 lead shot.
Lambert's wife also testified to seeing Whittle at the Moorgate at about 1:30. She asked him about, presumably, a different gun to the one he borrowed the day before. Whittle was agitated to be asked about this and said he knew nothing about it. He did say he had brought a gun back, which he had borrowed, and that he would never have a gun in his house again.
Under cross-examination, Mrs. Lambert, wife of the landlord of the Moorgate Inn, made a rather interesting comment. Apparently, Whittle's father had told her that a Mr. Orrell, the gamekeeper of the Smithills estate, had complained to him about his son's poaching activities on the moor. Whittle had arrived at the Moorgate on the Friday afternoon with 2 recently shot birds. This confirms that he had a gun in his possession on the Friday and also that he was on the moor.
Whittle then left the Moorgate at about 4 p.m. All this testimony leaves one quite breathless. Let us recap the evidence against Whittle and then look at the defence.
What do we know about the movements of Whittle on the Friday? Well, he'd been seen around 8:30 a.m. shooting near his home at Five Houses. He was later seen by William Sims at about 10:50 near the cabin on Winter Hill, again with a gun. At 11 o'clock he was seen again by William Stott and at 11:15 by William Fletcher. He was seen by Mrs. Garbett passing the beer house going in the direction of Winter Hill Summit at about 12:10 whilst Henderson was still inside. 20 minutes later he was seen again by Mrs. Garbett around 12:30 coming from his home and going in the general direction of the Moorgate Inn. He is known to have arrived at the inn at around 1:30 and stayed until 4 o'clock. All these sightings put Whittle in the vicinity of the killing with a gun at the material time.
The case for the defence has 3 strands. Firstly, Wilkins casts doubt on the prosecution witnesses, easily done with regards to Halliwell's testimony. Secondly, Wilkins emphasises the lack of a clear motive. Thirdly, Wilkins offers an alternative. George was not murdered, but the unfortunate victim of a poacher's misaimed shot, who maybe even to this day was ignorant of his actions. The prosecution's case was not helped by Benjamin Burrell being unable to identify Whittle as the unknown man with a gun on the moor. As noted earlier, Whittle's defence was undertaken by Charles Wilkins, who is regarded as one of the most eloquent counsel in England. Wilkins' exploits are celebrated in the autobiography of John Taylor, Attorney at Law, Bolton.
Whittle's trial was held at Liverpool Crown Court on Tuesday, the 2nd of April 1839, and it lasted from 9 o'clock in the morning until 7 o'clock at night. His defence counsel decided to make his closing address to the jury without calling any witnesses.
Wilkins stressed that the only evidence against his client was circumstantial, and it was incumbent on the jurors to give this very careful consideration. No witnesses were called for the defence, and after the judge gave his summing up, the jury retired at 9:05, returning at 10:12 to deliver a verdict of not guilty.
The crucial factor in this case was the fact that Henderson had been murdered. This rules out the possibility of his death being the result of a tragic accident. Now, what is the forensic evidence to support this conclusion? According to George Wolstenholme, the Bolton surgeon who carried out the post-mortem on Henderson, he found a 1-inch diameter entry wound just below the right ear. And if I show you on this model, just below the right ear, together with powder burns on the face. Now, this is evidence of a contact wound. Most of the shot had exited through the left orbit of the eye, over here, taking out the eye completely, and in so doing the path of the shot had severed one of the optic nerves in the right eye, so that it had fallen onto the cheek of the right cheek. And in the frontal lobe of the brain, that's this part here, there were found 6 pieces of lead shot, and this was given as the cause of Henderson's death. Now, all the forensic evidence points to the shooting being very close range, in all probability less than 1 foot away. This renders it very unlikely that it was an accidental shot or the result of a stray shot. A common hunting gun used in the early 19th century, and the type used by Whittle on the day, was a single-barreled percussion piece of approximately 18 inches to 39 inches in length, excluding the stock. The gun used by Whittle used a mixture of lead shot, and a mixture of number 1 and number 2 shot would contain approximately 730 pellets. The spread of lead shot on release would increase in direct proportion to the distance from the target. So, for example, a gun discharged at a distance of, say, 5 yards will give a spread shot of around 4 inches as it discharged. What circumstances could have led Henderson to being found in the ditch at the side of the road? As suggested by Whittle's defence counsel, he may well have felt the need to answer a call of nature and ventured into the ditch. If he'd been shot whilst he was still on the road, the momentum of the discharge from such a close range would have propelled his body on the opposite side of the road, on the left-hand side. There were no obvious signs of Henderson's body being dragged across the road and thrown into the ditch. If he was already in the ditch when he was shot, this would put his head level with the surface of the road, because the ditch was 3 foot deep. And this would account for the considerable amount of blood found on the road surface by the young lad Hoole. When found in the ditch, it was noticed that Henderson's trousers had been unbuttoned at the waistband, so this would also lend credence to the belief that he may have ventured into the ditch to answer a call of nature. Practically all the witnesses at the inquest and trial testified to knowing Whittle, and in fact knowing each other. It's curious and rather suspicious that no witnesses could be found to support Whittle's alibi, not even his own father.
However, back to Whittle. When we look at his movements that day, he did not hide the fact that he was on the moor with a gun. And if he had committed the murder, why do it so near to his own house? In fact, why do it at all? The ostensible motive was robbery, but although his pockets had been ripped open, his pack was untouched and the contents were intact. Whittle was also a crack shot and won many shooting competitions, so why shoot George at point-blank range? There are definitely more questions than answers in this case. So, if Whittle did not commit the murder, who did? If Whittle did do it, was he one of the first to go crazy and shoot people at random?
There is certainly evidence of bias against Whittle. If the press reports are anything to go by, they appear to have made their own mind-ups as to his guilt, and they're very prejudicial in the least. Then there is the amazing testimony of William Stott, which should have been ruled inadmissible. On the surface, then, the evidence certainly appears to be stacked against Whittle, but to my mind, too conveniently. With the benefit of modern forensic investigation techniques, it is possible to offer alternative suggestions which cast doubt on Whittle's guilt. Now, the crucial factor, as far as Whittle is concerned in this whole case, is his movements at the material time, in other words, the time of the shooting. Henderson arrived at Garbutt's beer house on the Friday, we're told, at about 12 o'clock. Whittle was seen going past at around 12:10. Now, if Henderson left soon afterwards, he could not have arrived